The wind had not stopped for 3 days. It was not a breeze. It was a hot, physical thing that came from the west, smelling of iron and dead earth. It scoured the New Mexico territory, peeling paint from the few buildings in the settlement 5 miles south and pushing dust into everything. The dust was fine as flour, pale red, and it coated Abigail McKee's tongue, gritted in her eyelashes, and settled in a fine layer on the surface of the water in her bucket. She stood by the well, hand on the wooden crank. The rope was frayed, and the pulley squealed a noise like a dying rabbit. This well was the only reason she was still here, in this small cabin her father had built. It was the only reason anyone spoke to her at all. The creek beds were cracked mud, mosaics of dryness. The river was a sluggish brown ribbon miles away. But her well, shallow as it was, still gave. She was 26 years old, a widow for 2 years. Her husband, Thomas, had been a quiet man who got loud when he drank, and he had died in a pointless argument over a card game that involved a man who worked for Tucker Hale. Abigail did not miss the whiskey on his breath, but she missed the warmth of another body in the cabin at night, the sound of another person breathing against the constant howl of the wind. Now, there was just her. She looked at her hands on the crank handle. They were chapped and strong. She was tall for a woman, lean from work and a sparse diet. Her brown hair was pulled back so tightly it made her temples ache, a poor defense against the grit. She hauled up the bucket. It was only half full. The water was silty. She let it settle, her eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing, just the gray scrub, the shimmering heat, and the endless aching blue of the sky. The sun was a hammer. In this territory, law was a suggestion, whispered from faraway cities. Here, the final word was spoken by the gun, its sound flat and quick in the dry air, a punctuation mark that replaced the tolling of a church bell. She carried the bucket inside, her boots scuffing the worn floorboards. The cabin was one room, clean but bare. A small iron stove, a narrow cot, a rough table, and 2 chairs, and in the corner, the chest. It was her father's, Elias McKee. He had been a man of loud certainties and quiet, fast-moving hands. He had died of a fever, leaving her the cabin, the well, and the rumors. The rumors were about gold. He had bragged, people said, of a strike, a map, a fortune hidden away. The chest was supposed to hold it. It was a heavy, dark wood chest, bound with iron, a large, intricate lock on its face. The lock itself was rusted through, the mechanism broken. Abigail had opened it the day after she buried him. There was no gold, no fortune. Inside, there was only his heavy leather-bound Bible, a single brittle piece of a map, torn in a strange, deliberate line, and the small, snapped piece of the key that had broken off in the lock. She had stared at the contents, the smell of dust and old paper rising to meet her. The map piece showed contour lines that meant nothing, a few symbols she could not read. The Bible was full of his stern, black margin notes. It was a bitter inheritance, a joke played by a dead man. She poured a cup of water, drank half, and used the other half to wash her face, the silty water a small, brief blessing. Her life was a thing of small labors. She mended clothes for the few families in the settlement. She sold bread when she had the flour, her small oven baking in the pre-dawn coolness. And she traded water, a bucket of her well water, shallow and gritty as it was, bought her flour, or salt, or cartridges for the rifle that leaned against the wall. Water was the only religion that mattered here, and her well, her shallow, failing well, was a fragile kind of faith. Miles away, hidden by the rise and fall of the arid land, a young man moved with a steady, ground-eating pace. His name was Koa. He was Comanche, young, but his face was set in the harsh lines of a man with a singular purpose. He was alone, a dangerous thing to be in this territory, where any rider could be a threat. He moved through the land of the white man not for war, but for business, a terrible, practical business. His cousins, a family group of 5, were being held at a military outpost, accused of stealing cattle. It was a lie, a setup. The rancher who accused them had pushed his herd onto their hunting grounds, then cried foul when the buffalo were scarce and the warriors had taken 2 cows to feed their children. Now they sat in a hot, airless guardhouse, waiting. Try not to use bullets, numbered lists, or lists of any kind to Instead, use paragraphs to present information. The price for their freedom was steep, not in dollars, but in gold. The soldiers, the agent, they were all part of it, and Koa had heard the rumors. The same rumors Abigail McKay lived with. He was searching for McKay's gold, not for riches, but for ransom. He carried in his pouch the other half of the map, the piece that had been given to his uncle by Elias McKay himself, years ago, as part of a bargain that had soured and died, leaving only the taste of betrayal. The air in the territory was thick with more than dust. It was thick with suspicion, the simmering conflict between the settlers, the Comanche, the traders who sold guns to anyone with coin, and the bands of rough men who called themselves a posse, was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Rumors of a coming railroad, of silver strikes in the mountains, of cheap land for the taking, all acted as bait, drawing desperate people into a landscape that had no mercy. And moving through this tension, profiting from it, was Tucker Hale. Abigail remembered Hale. He had been her father's shadow for a time, a former Army scout who had been discharged for reasons no one spoke of aloud. Now he ran a security outfit, a dozen hard men on fast horses who promised protection to ranchers in the settlement. For a price. He was a big man, broad in the shoulder, with pale, watchful eyes and a beard stained with tobacco. He nursed a deep, personal hatred for the Comanche, a hatred that went beyond the usual fear of the settlers. It was a bitter, acidic thing. She had seen him and her father sitting at this very table, their voices low, maps spread between them. Shady land deals, she knew now. Deals that had pushed people off their claims. Deals that had involved promises made and broken. Tucker Hale had been her father's enforcer. Now he was his own man, and his power was growing. Abigail wiped the table, the simple motion a way to anchor herself. Her solitude was a heavy blanket. She respected the memory of her father, the man who had taught her to shoot, to read, to set a rabbit snare. But she could not ignore the whispers, the cold silence from May, the woman who ran the saloon, or the careful way Dr. Isaiah, the town's colored physician, would look at her, his eyes full of a pity she did not want. She was suspicious of the legacy her father had left her. It felt less like a blessing and more like a debt, one she did not know how to pay. She looked at the chest. The secret it held was not gold, but a truth she was not sure she was strong enough to face. It was a locked box of mysteries, and she, with her shallow well and her fragile faith, was the unwilling guardian. The sun began to dip, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple, but bringing no relief from the heat. The wind just shifted, pushing the dust in a new direction. Abigail lit a small lamp, the oil precious. The yellow light threw shadows that danced with the draft coming through the chinks in the logs. She sat on her cot, the rifle close enough to touch. She did not fear the Comanche. Not really. She feared the stories about them, the same way she feared the stories about her father. She feared the desperation she saw in the eyes of the settlers. She feared the cold, appraising stare of Tucker Hale. She was balanced on a thin line, in a land that was all edges. The seeds of what was to come were already in the ground, waiting. Seeds of freedom for a group of prisoners, seeds of a personal, terrible justice, seeds of a compassion that might, if it were strong enough, find a way to grow even in this parched, unforward, forgiving soil. A compassion that could cross the lines drawn by hatred and prejudice. But like her well, such things were deep and hard to find, and the price for digging was always high. She saw him at dawn. The heat was already a presence, a weight in the air, though the sun had barely crested the eastern mountains. Abigail had gone to the well, her morning ritual, and found him collapsed near the trough. He was a shadow against the pale earth, face down, unmoving. Her first instinct was the rifle. She backed into the cabin, seized it, and returned, the heavy stock familiar against her shoulder. She chambered around, the sound a sharp, metallic click in the silence. She moved closer. He was young, Comanche, dressed in worn buckskins. A knife was sheathed at his hip. There was no bow, no rifle, just the knife. He was covered in the same red dust that covered everything. His black hair matted. He was either dead or very close to it. She nudged his boot with the barrel of her rifle. "Get up," she said, her voice flat. He groaned, a low, animal sound. He tried to push himself up, his muscles bunching, but he was too weak. He rolled onto his back, his eyes slitted against the new light. He saw her, the rifle, and his hand moved toward his knife. "Do not," she said. He stopped. His hand fell open. He was watching her. His face was gaunt, his lips cracked and bleeding. He was dying of thirst. She lowered the rifle slightly. This was the moment. The territory was full of stories. Fear told her to keep the gun level, to tell him to move on, to let the desert finish what it had started. He was the enemy, the stories said. But the man before her was not a story. He was just a man, younger than her, burning up from the inside. The wind whipped a strand of hair across her face, and she tasted the grit. She kept the rifle in the crook of her arm and walked to the well. The pulley squealed. She drew the bucket, her back to him. A dangerous, stupid thing to do. She could feel his eyes on her. She brought the bucket up, dipped the tin ladle into the silty water, and walked back to him. He tensed, watching the water, watching her. She held it out. He stared at the ladle, then at her face. He did not move. He spoke, his voice a dry rasp. Barely a sound. "What is the exchange for this water?" Abigail looked at his cracked lips, at the pulse beating weak and fast in his throat. She pushed the ladle closer. "It exchanges only for living." He waited a long second, his eyes searching hers for a trick. He found none. Slowly, painfully, he reached out. His hand shook. He grasped the ladle and brought it to his mouth, spilling half. He drank, his throat working. It was a terrible, desperate sound. He finished it and held it out for more. She filled it again, and again. After the third, he sat up, leaning against the trough. He poured the fourth ladle over his head, the muddy water plastering his hair to his skull. He closed his eyes, breathing deep. He looked at her. The weakness was still there, but the sharpness was returning to his gaze. He was a warrior. "My name is Koa," he said. "Abigail," she replied. "Abigail McKee." The name was like a rock dropped between them. His eyes narrowed. "McKee," he repeated. "Elias McKay's daughter." "Yes," she said, her grip tightening on the rifle. "He was my father." Koa pushed himself to his feet. He was unsteady, but he stood tall. He was lean, but there was a strength in his shoulders that the exhaustion could not hide. He reached into a leather pouch at his belt. Abigail raised the rifle. "Not a weapon," he said, "a debt." He pulled out a small, folded piece of hide. He opened it. It was a map, drawn in charcoal and some kind of faded red dye. It showed symbols, not the careful topographical lines of her father's map piece. It showed a shape that looked like a dry riverbed, a mark for a large tree, and a box. "Your father, Elias McKee," he said, his voice stronger now. "He made a promise to my people. He took our gold, gold given for peace, for medicine, to let us hunt our own lands. He took it, and he gave us this." He tapped the map piece, a promise of more. Then he vanished. He broke his word. The air went still. Abigail stared at the map. It meant nothing to her. "Wait," she said. She backed into the cabin, her eyes never leaving him. She went to the dark wooden chest in the corner. She lifted the heavy lid and took out the torn piece of brittle paper. Her father's map. She brought it out into the sunlight. Koa looked at it, his expression hardening. She held it out next to his. They were completely, utterly different. Hers was a map of the land, of hills and elevations, of a specific, small location. His was a map of symbols, a promise. They did not fit. They were not two halves of a whole. They were two different lies. Koa looked at her map, then at her. He does not show the gold. He said, he shows the rock. What gold? Abigail demanded, her voice shaking. There is no gold. I opened the chest. There is nothing. Koa shook his head. Not in the chest, in the ground. The gold he took from us, and the gold he promised. He looked around, at the well, at the barren land. He said he kept it safe. For all of us. He lied. Why are you here? She asked. My cousins, he said, his voice going flat and hard. They are held by the soldiers. They are blamed for stealing cattle from a white man's ranch. It is a lie. The soldiers say they will be set free, for gold. I came to collect the debt your father owes. A cold dread washed over Abigail. This was not a rumor. This was a man standing in front of her, demanding a payment she could not make, for a crime she did not understand. Before she could answer, a new sound cut through the wind, the drumming of horses, many horses coming fast from the south. Koa spun, his hand flying to his knife. Get inside, Abigail said, shoving him toward the cabin. Who is it? He hissed. Trouble. She pulled him through the door just as the riders crested the low rise. It was Tucker Hale. He had 5 men with him, all armed, all wearing the same hard, indifferent expression. They fanned out, forming a half circle around the cabin, their horses kicking up dust. Tucker Hale swung down from his horse, his spurs jingling. He was a big man, and the pistol at his hip looked heavy and used. He grinned, but his pale eyes were not smiling. Morning, Mistress McKay, he called out. His voice was oily, too friendly. Looks like you have company. Abigail stepped out onto the porch, her rifle held low, pointed at the ground. Koa was in the shadows behind her, flattened against the wall, his knife in his hand. They are just passing through, Mr. Hale, Abigail said. Getting water. Hale chuckled. A dry, unpleasant sound. He stepped forward, his eyes scanning the porch. He saw Koa's shadow. That one, he said, pointing a thick finger, is not just passing through. He is a thief, a killer, wanted for rustling and for the murder of a ranch hand over on the Cimarron. We tracked him here. He is not, Abigail started, but Hale cut her off. I am bringing him in, Hale said, and I am here to search this property. On what authority? Abigail asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. Hale patted the badge pinned to his vest. The authority of the territorial government. He said, a patent lie. We have reason to believe he has stolen property with him. Gold taken from that murdered rancher. He knew about the chest. This was not about Koa. It was about the gold, her father's rumored gold. Hale and his men started to dismount, their rifles in their hands. This is my land, Mr. Hale, Abigail said. Her voice was louder now, carrying over the wind. I do not know whose law you ride with, but this rifle... I am the one who pulls the trigger here. Hale stopped. His smile vanished. His men stopped, their hands on their weapons. You are making a mistake, girl, Hale said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You are harboring a fugitive. That makes you an outlaw, too. I am giving a man water, she said. Hale's eyes went from her to the cabin, to the dark wooden chest he could just see through the open door. He wanted to push past her. He wanted the chest. His men were watching him, waiting for the word. They were hired guns, but they were in the open. She had the rifle, and she was in the shadow of the doorway. This is not over, Hale snarled. He was not used to being denied. He would be back. He said he would come back with a warrant, a real one, and tear this place apart. He looked at Koa, and he will hang. He was bluffing. The nearest judge was 100 miles away. There was no warrant. There was only greed. Abigail had to make a choice. If they left, Koa was dead. If they stayed, she thought of her father. She thought of the whispers. She looked at the hard, greedy faces of Hale's men. She spoke, her voice clear and cold. This land was my father's. Elias McKay. He is buried 20 yards from where you stand, under that stand of yucca. The men shifted. They looked toward the small pile of stones that marked the grave. Any man, she said, who fires a shot onto this property, any man who steps onto this land with violence, you are firing into my father's grave. It hit them. She saw it. They were hard men, but they were superstitious. They lived too close to death to mock it. Firing on a grave, a white man's grave, was a line. One of the men, a younger one, lowered his rifle. Hale saw the moment was lost. His face turned purple with rage. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. He looked at Abigail with pure hatred. "You will regret this," he whispered. He pointed a finger at her. "When I come back, that grave will not stop me." He ripped his horse's head around and spurred it, riding back south, his men following, a cloud of angry dust rising behind them. The silence that fell was heavier than the heat. Abigail was shaking, the rifle barrel trembling. She leaned against the doorframe, her legs weak. Koa stepped out of the shadow. He looked at her, his expression a mix of suspicion and something else. Gratitude, maybe, or respect. "You saved my life," he said. "I saved my well," she said, trying to sound rougher than she felt. He looked at the 2 map pieces, his in his hand, hers on the table. "Your father," he said, his voice quiet. "He did not just break his word. The man he met, the one who gave him the gold. My uncle, he was found dead 2 days later. My young cousin was with him. He died, too, of a fever. They said, but we know better. Your father's name is on that death." Abigail felt the blood drain from her face. She looked from Koa's steady, accusing gaze to the heavy chest in the corner. The gold was not a treasure. It was a pretext. It was blood money. It was evidence. And her father, the man she had respected, was at the heart of it. She looked at Koa. The wind howled, pushing dust into the clean cabin. She had chosen. She had picked her side, not based on race or law, but on the simple, sudden act of giving water. "There is a place," she said, her voice hollow, "under the floor, a root cellar." She walked to the worn rug in the center of the room and pulled it back, revealing the trap door. She had made her choice. She was hiding a Comanche warrior from a white lawman. She was protecting the man who had just accused her father of murder. And in that moment, the solid ground of her life turned to dust. He went down the ladder into the darkness. It was a small space, smelled of damp earth and dried potatoes. Abigail pulled the heavy trapdoor closed, sliding the rug back over it with her boot. The cabin was plunged into silence, broken only by the incessant wind. She waited a full minute, her ears straining. Nothing, just the scrape of a yucca branch against the glass. She lit the lamp, the flame weak and yellow. She lifted the trapdoor. "Go down," she said. Koa was waiting at the bottom. She descended the ladder, pulling the door closed over their heads. The blackness was complete. She fumbled for a match and lit the lamp again, its glow pushing back the small, cramped shadows. The cellar was shallow. They could not stand fully upright. Shelves lined 2 walls, holding glass jars, most of them empty. A few sacks of dried beans and potatoes were piled in a corner. Koa leaned against the dirt wall, his breathing harsh. In the close lamplight, she saw what she had missed in the bright sun and the adrenaline. His buckskin trousers were dark, stiff with blood on the left thigh. And he held his right side, his hand pressed tight just below his ribs. "You are hurt," she said. It was not a question. "It is nothing." She set the lamp on a shelf. "Do not lie to me. I just lied to Tucker Hale for you. I expect the courtesy of the truth." He looked at her, his eyes dark in the weak light. He was assessing her again. He relaxed his hand from his side. His shirt was stuck to his skin with more dried blood. She went back up the ladder, opened the door just a crack, and listened. The wind. She climbed out, went to her small trunk, and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. Clean rags, her sewing needle, and thread. She found a jar of her mother's rosemary salve. She returned to the cellar, closing the world out behind her. "Show me," she said. He hesitated, then pulled his shirt up. It was an old wound, a puncture, ugly and inflamed. The skin was red, swollen, and hot to the touch. "An arrow," she said. He nodded. 3 weeks. It does not heal. She looked at the long, fresh gash on his thigh. It was bleeding sluggishly. This is new. He glanced at it. A fall. "The rocks are sharp." She soaked a rag in the whiskey. "This will hurt," she said. He braced himself. "Go on." She cleaned the cut on his leg first. It was deep, full of grit. He did not make a sound, but she saw the muscles in his jaw clench. She stitched it closed with steady, practiced motions, her fingers surprisingly nimble. He watched her. "You sew better than you lie," he said, his voice a low rasp. She pulled the thread tight and tied it off. "I speak little," she replied, not looking up. "It makes me wrong less often." She turned her attention to his side. This was worse. The infection was deep. She cleaned it as best she could, the smell sharp and unpleasant. She pressed on the edges, and he hissed, his breath drawn in sharply. She packed it with the salve. "This is not enough," she said. "It is poisoned. You have a fever." "I am fine." "No, you are not. You need medicine. Real medicine." She sat back on her heels, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. They sat in the dim light, the silence stretching. The cellar felt like a grave. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Why did you not let them take me?" She found herself telling him about Thomas, about the card game, about the man who worked for Tucker Hale, about the fight that was called fair. He listened, his face a mask. "He wants this land," she finished. "He wants the well, and he believes the same stories you do. He thinks there is gold." "There is gold," Koa said, his voice certain. "Your father took it. He promised it for the freedom of my uncle's band, to let them pass safely. He took it, and then they were stopped. My uncle and his son, they were found dead. Hale's men were there. They said it was a fever." The cellar felt colder. "Your cousins," she said, "the ones in the guardhouse." "They are my uncle's family. Hale set the trap for them. He used the rancher. He wants them gone, so no one is left to ask for the gold your father stole. He thinks the map to the rest is in that chest." Abigail looked at the dirt floor. "My father, he was a hard man, but I did not know he was this." Ka did not answer. He just watched her, his fever-bright eyes holding no pity, only a shared, tangled fate. As evening approached, the fever climbed. He was shivering, though the cellar was warm. She knew she had to go. Dr. Isaiah was the only one she trusted, the only one who might help. She gave Koa the last of the water in her bucket. "I will be back," she said. "Bar the door from the inside. Do not open it, for anyone." She took her rifle and a small pouch of coins and slipped out of the cabin, walking the 5 miles to the settlement as the sky bled purple. The town was a row of false-fronted buildings, stark against the twilight. The wind pushed dust down the main street. She felt the eyes on her before she saw them. Mrs. Gable, sweeping her porch, stopped, her broom held stiffly. She stared. 2 men outside the general store went quiet, their conversation dying. They watched her pass. Tucker Hale had been busy. His poison had spread faster than she could walk. Abigail McKee, the reclusive widow, hiding a Comanche, digging for her father's gold. She kept her head high, her hand light on her rifle. She went to the small building at the end of the street, the one with the faded sign that read Dr. Isaiah. She knocked. The door opened. He was a tall, older man, his hair gray at the temples. His skin was the color of dark coffee. He looked at her, his face calm, and stepped aside. "Mistress McKee," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "You look troubled. Please come in." His office was small but immaculate, smelling of carbolic soap and dried herbs. "I have a sickness," she said, the lie clumsy on her tongue. "I need something for a high fever." Dr. Isaiah looked at her, his eyes seeming to see straight through her. "A fever. I see." He paused. "Tucker Hale was in town this afternoon. He was very loud. He spoke of a fever at your cabin." Abigail felt her composure crack. She had not realized how alone she was until this moment. "Yes, not me. A man. He is hurt. An old wound. It is bad." The doctor nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he already knew. He turned to the wooden cabinets behind him. He ground some powder with a mortar and pestle, folded it into a small paper. He took a small tin of dark salve from a shelf. "This powder is laudanum," he said, "a small amount. It will help with the pain and let him sleep. This salve is for the infection. Clean the wound, apply it, and keep it clean." She reached for her coin pouch. He put his hand up. "No charge." "Why?" she asked, her voice tight. "Everyone in this town." "Not everyone. Your father, Elias, was a complicated man. He did in this territory what many men do. He took what he could, but when I came here, with my papers and my skill, the town council wanted to run me out. Your father was on that council. He was the one who stood up. He said my hands were skilled, and he did not care about the color of the skin that covered them. He silenced them. I pay my debts, Mistress McKee." She took the medicine. "Thank you," she whispered. "Be careful," he said, his gaze serious. "Hale is not just a bully. He is a man who enjoys the suffering of others. He has a dark past with the Comanche. This is not just about gold for him." She nodded and left. Stepping back into the hostile twilight, she needed supplies. She crossed the street to the saloon, the only place open late. The saloon was mostly empty. A few rail surveyors drank at a corner table. May, the proprietor, was behind the bar, polishing a glass. She was a large woman, built like a wagon, with sharp, intelligent eyes. She stopped polishing as Abigail entered. Abigail walked to the bar. "May, I need flour and salt." May set the glass down. Her face was impassive. "Heard you had company today?" The surveyors in the corner went quiet. Abigail laid her coins on the bar. "Just the wind, May." May looked at the coins, then at Abigail. "Tucker Hale says it was a Comanche. Says you were digging up your father's gold with him." Abigail met her gaze. "Tucker Hale lies." "Does he?" May leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Your father was full of secrets. Child, I knew Elias. I knew him well. He owed people. After my husband died, left me with nothing but debt. Your father walked in here. He put the deed to this place on the bar. Said it was mine. Free and clear. Said he was balancing his books." She tapped a finger on the polished wood. "I never knew what books he meant, but I know that chest of his holds more than an old Bible. You be careful. Hale is not the only one who remembers your father's promises." May slid a bag of flour and a smaller bag of salt across the bar. She pushed the coins back toward Abigail. "This one is on Elias's account." Abigail took the supplies and fled. The walk back was worse. The darkness was total. The wind a living thing that shrieked and plucked at her clothes. Every shadow seemed to hold a man, every gust of wind the sound of a horse. As she crested the final rise, she saw it, and her blood ran cold. On the ridge opposite her cabin, silhouetted against the last faint glow of the sky, was a rider. He was still, watching. It was not one of Hale's men. The shape was wrong. The long, straight posture, the way the horse stood, patient. It was a Comanche. She froze. He did not move. He was not attacking. He was not signaling. He was just watching. It had to be Maka, the leader Koa had spoken of. He knew Koa was here. He was not launching a rescue. He was waiting. He was letting the world turn, letting people make their choices. She dropped below the ridgeline, circling wide, using the gullies and scrub for cover. She reached the cabin from the back, slipped inside, and bolted the door. She opened the trap door. Koa was there, his knife in his hand. "You are alone," he stated. She nodded, her heart hammering. "No, not alone. We are being watched. By your people." Koa's expression tightened. "Maka, he is waiting." She gave him the powder, mixing it with water. He drank it. She dressed his wound again with a doctor's salve. The medicine worked quickly. The tension eased from his face, his breathing evening out. He gave a small, dry smile. "This medicine," he said, "it will make the sky seem less hot." "How?" she asked. "Because my eyes will be closed." They sat in the quiet. She brought out her map piece. He took his from his pouch. "They do not fit," she said, frustrated. "It is all useless." "No." He laid his hide map on the cellar floor. He placed her paper map over it. "Look." She knelt beside him. The lamp cast a pool of yellow light on the two strange diagrams. "Your father's lines are for the land," he said, "hills, creeks. Mine are for symbols, a promise. But they do not line up." He shifted the paper. He turned it slightly. He was not lining up the edges. He was lining up a small circle on his map with a specific set of hills on hers. "Look," he whispered, his finger tracing the compass. Her map had a precise, drawn compass rose. His had a simple arrow marked for north. When he aligned the maps, the two norths pointed in different directions. They were off by a single, tiny degree. "It is a mistake," she said. Koa shook his head. "White men are precise with maps. Your father was precise. This is not a mistake. It is a signal. The landmark is not where the compass says. It is where the other compass says." They both stared at the mismatch. It was a hidden message. The location was not what it seemed. Koa pointed to the symbol on his map, the one he had aligned with her hills. It was not a star. Like a mine, it was a circle with a cross in the middle. "What is that?" she asked. "It is our sign," he said, "for a well." "But my well is here." He looked up at the trap door. "Not your well, an old well, a well that has been filled in." The truth was not in a mine. It was buried, hidden, just like the secrets in her father's chest, which sat in the room above them, its lock broken, its morality still clamped shut. The watchers came before sunrise. They were not a war party. They were a statement. Abigail saw them from the cabin window. 4 riders, silhouetted on the high ridge to the east, where Maka had been. They sat their ponies, unmoving, outlined against the pale, bruised-looking sky. They lit no fires. They made no sound. They were just there. When Koa came up from the cellar for air, his face gray with fever and lack of sleep, he saw them too. He stood in the shadow of the doorway for a long time. "Maka," he said. "Are they here for you?" Abigail asked, her hand on her rifle. "They are here to see what you will do." He looked at her. "And to see what I will do. Maka will not take me from your land. I must choose to walk away from it. But you cannot walk." "Not yet." He coughed, a dry, rattling sound, and went back down into the damp, cool earth. They stayed in the cramped cellar all day. The laudanum was gone, and his fever returned. Less powerful this time, but stubborn. He slept in fits, his dreams full of low whispers she could not understand. She sat on the hard-packed floor, the rifle across her lap, listening for the sound of Hale's horses over the constant, scratching wind. Night came. The silence in the cabin was thick, heavy as a wool blanket. "I must sleep," she said. Her eyes burned with exhaustion. He was awake, his gaze clear, the fever receding for a moment. He was weak, but he was present. She stood. She checked her rifle, then methodically began to eject the cartridges, one by one, the brass shells clicking into her palm. She set the 6 bullets in a neat row on the rough table. She handed the heavy, empty rifle to him. He looked at it, then at her. She pointed to the trap door. "If he comes, he will come through the main door. You will be down there. It will be loud. You will have 1 shot. Make it count." He took the rifle. "It is empty." "I know. So is his head. A rifle butt is a good argument." She lay down on her cot, pulling her thin blanket up, not bothering to take off her boots. She was asleep in moments, a brittle, exhausted sleep. When she woke, gray light was filtering through the dirty window. Koa was sitting at the table, his back straight. The rifle was across his knees. His eyes were on the door. He had not been in the cellar. He had guarded the cabin. She sat up, her body aching. The 6 brass cartridges were exactly where she had left them, untouched. She got up, splashed water on her face from the bucket, and took the rifle from his lap. He did not resist. She loaded it, sliding each cartridge into the gate, the sounds loud and final in the morning quiet. He watched her, his expression unreadable. "You trust," he said, his voice rough, "but you are not foolish." She chambered around. "Neither are you." They were almost out of food. The last of the cornmeal was gritty. The water in the well was lower, the mud thicker. The watchers on the ridge had not moved. She had to go to town. "It is a trap," Koa said, as she tied her bonnet. "Hale is waiting for you." "I know, but we are out of flour, and I am tired of hiding." He stood, testing his weight on his injured leg. He was better. The salve and the rest had worked, but he was far from whole. "I should come." "No, you are the trap. I am just the bait. Stay down." As she stepped outside, a rider approached from the south. It was not Hale. It was a boy from the settlement, young Davy, who sometimes ran errands. He looked terrified. He stopped his mule a dozen yards away. "Mistress McKee," he stammered, holding out a folded paper. "Mr. Hale said I had to give you this. It is official." She took the paper. It was a crude forgery of a legal summons, written in a florid, barely literate hand, accusing her of harboring a known hostile and theft of information, and demanding her presence at the saloon for a public inquiry before noon. It was signed by a magistrate of the territory. There was no magistrate. There was only Tucker Hale. "He says you have to come, mistress, or he is coming with his men, and he is bringing fire this time." The boy did not wait for an answer. He kicked his mule and fled back toward the town. Abigail folded the paper. She looked at Koa, who had watched from the cellar steps. "He wants you away from the cabin," Koa said, "so he can come here and tear it apart. He is looking for the map." "I know." She tucked the paper into her dress pocket. "And I am going. If I do not, he wins. He proves I am afraid." She started walking. The 5-mile walk was a hot, dusty eternity. She ignored the main track, staying in the shallow arroyos, her eyes scanning the ridges. Halfway there, she saw it, beside the path, a small pile of flat stones. 3 high, it had not been there 2 days ago. Tucked under the top stone was a single, black crow's feather. She stopped, a warning. She looked around. The watchers on the ridge near her cabin were gone, but this sign meant they were still here. All around her, Maka knew. He knew Hale's plan. The sign was not for Koa. It was for her. It meant trap. She already knew, but the sign meant something more. It meant the Comanche, her supposed enemies, were warning her against the white man, her supposed protector. The world was upside down. She touched the feather, then left it, and kept walking. When she reached the settlement, the silence was worse than the wind. Mrs. Gable, who had once traded bread recipes with her, saw her coming, picked up her laundry basket, and went inside, slamming the door. The 2 men at the general store stopped talking and just stared. their eyes flat and hostile. She heard a word whispered as she passed. Traitor. She walked into the saloon. It was dim, smelling of stale beer and quiet malice. Tucker Hale was at a table in the back, surrounded by 4 of his men. The fake magistrate's paper sat in front of him. He grinned when he saw her. Well, look who it is, Mistress McKee. Come to answer for your crimes. I came for flour, Abigail said, walking to the bar. May was there, polishing glasses. She did not look at Abigail. May, flour, and salt. Hale laughed. You got nerve, girl. I will give you that. You are standing with savages against your own people. You are spitting on your father's name. My father's name is my business, Mr. Hale. She put her coins on the bar. May, please. May looked at Hale, then at Abigail. Her face was a mask. She turned, her movement stiff, and began to scoop flour into a bag. Hale stood up, his chair scraping loudly. I am the law here now, and I say you are done. Your well, your land. It is forfeit. You consorted with the enemy. Abigail turned to face him. Her hand was nowhere near a weapon. She was tired, dusty, and small in the large, hostile room. You are not the law, Tucker. You are just a bully, and you are afraid. His face darkened. Afraid of what? Of that chest. You are terrified of what is in that chest. You think it is gold. You think it is a map. You think it is something you can spend. She took a step toward him. But it is not. It is just an old book and a piece of paper. You have spilled more blood for a rumor than most men spill in a war. Hale's hand went to his pistol. You watch your mouth. May slid the bag of flour onto the bar. She kept her back to the room, but as Abigail reached for it, May's hand slipped from beneath the counter and pushed a folded, yellowed piece of paper toward her. Abigail's fingers closed over it, sliding it into her pocket as she picked up the flour. Haley saw the movement. What was that? What was what? Abigail said. Give it to me. It is my receipt. She pulled out the fake summons. This one. Your magistrate has terrible handwriting. Hale's men laughed. Hale's face went white. He was not used to being mocked. You have until sunset, he snarled. You bring me that chest, all of it, or we burn you out. We will see how brave you are when your roof is on fire. He stormed out of the saloon, his men following him, their spurs loud on the floorboards. The saloon was silent. May turned around. Her face was pale. You need to go, child, she whispered. What is this? Abigail asked, pulling out the real paper. May wrung her hands. Your father, he gave me this place. He said he was balancing his books. This was with his papers. I kept it. I should not have. It is dangerous. Abigail unfolded it. It was a receipt, a bill of lading from a freight office, dated 11 years ago. It was for supplies, but in the margin, in her father's unmistakable handwriting, was a list. Exchange gold, falsified count for land treaty claim, rations corn, arms 200 rifles. It was an agreement, a treaty. Her father had lied about the amount of gold. Falsified count. He had used it to broker a deal for land, food, and guns. And at the bottom, 2 signatures, alias McKee, and as witness, Tucker Hale. In the top corner, drawn small, was a circle with a cross in it, the symbol for the well. This is it, Abigail whispered. This is the gold. It was a shipment, a promise. A promise he broke. May said, they said he and Hale took the shipment, the guns, the food. It never got to the tribe. And then the sickness came. Abigail fled. She did not go straight back. She went to Dr. Isaiah's office. He opened the door before she knocked. He had seen the confrontation. He pulled her inside. You are a fool to provoke him, he said, his voice sharp with worry. He is going to burn my home. Doctor, I am already a fool. She paused, catching her breath. Doctor, the old well, north of here, the one on the maps. His face changed. He looked old and very, very sad. Yes, I know it. What is it? It is a grave, Mistress McKay. He told her, the smallpox? 10 years ago. It had swept through, devastating the Comanche camp that had been waiting there, waiting for a shipment of food and medicine, a shipment that never arrived. They died, he said, his voice low. So many, men, women. There was no one to bury them. The well was dry. They were put there to keep the animals away. It is a mass grave. The sickness, Abigail whispered, her blood cold. Koa said his uncle and cousin died of a fever. Dr. Isaiah nodded. It was a terrible time. Hale and his men were supposed to be protecting the territory. They made a quarantine line. They would not let anyone in or out. They would not even let me near. They said they were containing the sickness. But the shipment, Abigail said, clutching the receipt, the food, the medicine. It was for them. The doctor looked at the paper. I did not know. I only knew they were sick. And they died. And Tucker Hale was there. Abigail ran. She ran the whole way, not on the path, but through the sharp rocks and the cat claw. Her lungs burning. Hale's men would be at the cabin. She had to get to Koa. She arrived, breathless, to an empty clearing. The cabin was untouched. She burst inside. The trap door was open. Koa was gone. She panicked, spinning around, rifle up. A sound came from the porch. He was there, leaning against the post, his own knife in his hand. He was watching the ridges. Maka, he said, he pointed. A second arrow, this one broken, was stuck in the dirt. It pointed northwest, toward the old well. Hale's men were on a false trail, led away by the Comanche warriors. Maka had protected her, and him. She collapsed against the doorframe, shoving the receipt and the salve into his hands. I know, she panted. I know what the well is. He read the paper, his face turning to stone. He looked at her, his eyes black with a grief and a rage so deep it frightened her. My cousin, he said, his voice dead, the one who died of fever. It was this. They were left to die, while your father and Hale stole their medicine. He was weak, but he pushed himself upright, his purpose a steel rod in his back. We go, now. You cannot, you can barely stand. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. We go. We need the horse, she said, pulling away. We cannot walk. I will get him. You can ride. I just do not like it. He looked at her, and in the middle of the horror, a spark of the dry wit she had heard in the cellar returned. If you fall from the horse, I will laugh. She glared at him, pulling her saddlebags from the floor. Then you had better practice laughing quietly, because you and I are going to that grave. The horses were lathered and nervous, sensing the tension from their riders. Tucker Hale pulled his men to a stop on the low rise, the same one where Abigail had stood and faced him. He had expected to find a cold cabin, a simple target. He had expected her to be in town, trapped by his fake summons, her spirit broken. Instead, she was standing on the porch, rifle in her hand, and the young Comanche was there, leaning against the doorframe, a shadow of a man but with a knife in his hand. Hale's face, already red from the sun, went dark with fury. The trap had failed. The boy he had sent with the summons must have warned her. Or maybe the Comanche had. He looked up at the high ridges that encircled the small valley. His men saw them at the same time. 5 riders, sitting still as stone, high up, just watching. They were too far to shoot, but too close for comfort. They were ghosts, dark against the sky. One of Hale's men, a nervous young man named Miller, wet his lips. Tucker, that is a lot of them. They are just watching. Of course they are watching. Hale snarled. He was furious at being outmaneuvered. He was not just angry, he was humiliated. He had been played by a woman and a half-dead Comanche. They are watching to see us take what is ours. He dismounted, pulling his own rifle from his saddle scabbard. This ends. We are taking the chest, and we are taking him. He pointed at Koa. "The girl, she is an accomplice. Tie her up." He did not wait for an answer. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot was hasty, meant to frighten. The bullet splintered the wood of the porch roof, 2 feet above Abigail's head. The world exploded. Abigail did not flinch. She had been expecting it. She dropped, pulling Koa back into the doorway as a volley of shots ripped through the front of the cabin. Wood chips and dust filled the air. "Get down," she yelled, shoving him toward the trap door. "No," Koa said, his voice a low growl. He was weak, but his rage was a fuel. He braced himself in the corner, his knife in one hand. He grabbed her empty rifle with the other, the one she had left on the table, holding it like a club. He was a target, drawing their fire. "They are trying to kill you," she screamed, reloading her own rifle behind the flimsy cover of the wall. He coughed, a racking, dry sound. "They have been trying for 10 years. Hale was yelling outside. "Spread out, flank the cabin. I want that chest." 2 men broke right, running low, trying to get to the single-side window. Abigail saw them through a chink in the logs. She pushed her rifle barrel through, aimed not at the men, but at the ground in front of them. She fired. The bullet kicked up a cloud of dirt and rock fragments, stinging their faces. They yelped and dove for cover behind the trough. Miller, the young one, tried to rush the porch. He was brave, or foolish. He came fast, head down. Abigail stepped into the open doorway. She did not aim for his chest. She aimed for his pride. She fired. The bullet sang past his ear and plucked the hat from his head. It spun in the air, a perfect, neat hole through the crown, and landed in the dust. Miller stopped dead. He stared at his hat. He looked at her. She was already reloading. He scrambled backward on his hands and knees, his nerve completely broken. "Good shot," Koa whispered, a grim smile on his face. "Just practicing," she panted. Hale was screaming in rage. "You useless fools! He is one man, she is one woman. Rush them!" But his men were not fools. They were hired, not loyal. They were facing a woman who could shoot the hat off a running man, and they were surrounded by an unknown number of Comanche warriors who sat on the ridges like patient vultures. Their pay did not cover this. There was a lull. The shooting stopped. The only sound was the wind and Hale's cursing. "Abigail," Hale yelled. "Send him out. Send out the Comanche, and you walk away. I will even let you keep the cabin." She saw Koa look at her. He was weighing her life against his. "You lie!" Abigail shouted back, her voice clear. "You will not let anyone walk away. You are not here for him. You are here for this." She backed up, her eyes on the windows, and slammed her hand on the lid of her father's chest. "You are here for a rumor." Haley was quiet. Then he laughed, a low, ugly sound. "That is right, girl. I'm here for that. Elias owed me. He owed me, and he died. I am collecting. Now open it." "No." The firing started again, more intense this time. They were aiming low, trying to punch through the logs. Bullets thudded into the walls, one whining through the open door and smashing a glass jar on the shelf. Koa grabbed his wounded side. He was fading. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only the fever and the pain. Abigail looked at him, then at the chest. Her mind was racing. The key, the broken key. Her father had always told her, there is more than one way to lock a door. It was a flash of truth, a memory so sharp it cut through the panic. Her father, sitting at this table, his Bible open. He had been mending the leather binding with a small, sharp tool. He had been so focused. She scrambled to the chest, ignoring the bullets. She lifted the heavy lid. The Bible was there, just as it always was. She grabbed it. It was heavy, too heavy. She ran her fingers along the inside of the back cover. Under the thick leather flap, there was a lump, a hard, thin shape. She tore the leather. It was a key, not the small, snapped piece from the lock, but a second, thinner, flat brass key. She looked at the chest. Where was the second lock? Koa pointed, his hand shaking, the carving. On the front of the chest, in the center of the iron banding, was a small, decorative flourish, a metal rose. In the center of the rose was a tiny, almost invisible slot. She shoved the key in. It turned. A loud click echoed in the cabin, and a section of the floor of the chest, a false bottom, popped up. Next to her, Koa let out a long, slow breath. She reached in. Under the false bottom was a small, leather-bound ledger, a notebook, and a stack of papers, tied with a ribbon, and a small, heavy cloth bag. She opened the bag. Gold, not nuggets, but 20, maybe 30, heavy gold coins, military issue, the payment, the gold her father had falsified. She opened the notebook. Her father's handwriting, tight and angry, filled the page. October 10th, 1868. T. Hale has taken the shipment, the rifles and the laudanum. He says the quarantine is for the public good. He lies. He means to let them die. He says it is a solution. I argued, but he holds the papers over me. The land grants. I am complicit. Abigail's hands were shaking. She flipped the page. November 1st, 1868. They are all dead. Hale's men burned the camp. He says he buried the gold, the payment from the army. He says it is safer that way. I know where the old well. He does not know I saw him. She flipped again. A final entry. March 4th, 1869. My heart is sick. I cannot fix what is done, but I can return what is left. I will give the map to Itu's brother. The gold is not a mine. It is a debt. It is buried in the dry ground by the well. The medicine, the food, it is all gone. But the gold remains. It is blood money. But it is all I have left to give. I will write this. He had died of the fever a week later, before he could write anything. Abigail looked up. Koa was reading over her shoulder. His face was a mask of cold fury. He knew. Koa whispered. He knew, and he did nothing. He tried, Abigail said, her voice hollow. He was trapped by Hale. The shooting had stopped again. The silence was absolute. Abigail, Hale shouted. I am done playing. We have oil. We will burn you out. This was it, the moment. A new voice cut through the air, a voice that was not Hale's. It was deep, powerful, and spoke in clear English. Tucker Hale. Hale spun around. His men froze. On the ridge, not far away, sat Maka. He was not alone. There were a dozen warriors with him now, on horseback, their lances and rifles dark against the sky. They had moved closer, silent as the shadows. We have not come for your blood. Hale, Maka called, his voice echoing in the small valley. We have come for the promise. Hale's face was pale. He looked from Maka to the cabin. He was caught. Abigail, her heart pounding, stepped out onto the porch. She was unarmed. She held the open ledger in her hands. Koa was right behind her, using the door frame for support. She wants to talk, Miller said, relieved. Shut up, Hale snapped. What promise? Hale shouted, trying to sound brave. I made no promise. Abigail held up the book. My father says you did. She read the entry, the one about the stolen rifles, the stolen medicine, the laudanum. She read it, her voice high and clear, carrying on the wind. Hale's men were listening. They looked at Hale. This was not about a gold claim. This was about something else, something dark. It is a lie, Hale roared. A forgery. The girl is crazy. Maka, his voice calm, spoke again. We do not need gold to live. Tucker Hale, we need it to buy the medicine you stole. We need it to feed our children when you hunt the buffalo for their hides. We do not need the gold. We need the promise to be kept, so we can trust again. Abigail looked at Koa. She looked at the book. She looked at the men who were hiding behind her well, and at the men on the ridge who were watching. Her father's honor was gone. Her name was stained, not by rumors, but by the truth. She had a choice: hide the book and save the memory of her father, or honor the debt. She looked at Hale. She closed the book. "My father owed a debt," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "He died before he could pay it." She looked at Koa, then at Maka on the hill. "I will pay it. I will deliver what my father owed." Koa looked at her, and for the first time, the suspicion in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by something she could not name. Hale knew he had lost. The book, the Comanche, his own men's hesitation. He raised his rifle, his face a mask of hate, and aimed it straight at Abigail's chest. "No!" Koa yelled, and threw himself at her, knocking her back into the cabin as the rifle cracked. The shot echoed, flat and dead in the dry air. Koa hit her hard, a solid weight that drove the breath from her lungs and sent them both tumbling backward into the cabin. A tangle of limbs on the dusty floor. The bullet thudded into the thick log of the doorframe, precisely where her heart had been. She gasped, pushing at him, the weight of him pinning her down. He was heavy, and for a terrifying second, she thought he had been hit. He rolled off, coughing, his hand clutching his wounded side. Outside, the shouting was confused. Hale's men were no longer firing. They were looking at the ridges, where Maka and his warriors sat, impassive and silent, a dark promise of retribution. "Tucker!" one of them yelled, his voice high with panic. "There are too many! This is not what you paid us for!" Maka's voice came down from the hill, deep and resonant, cutting through the wind. "You have fired on a house of truce. Tucker Hale, the blood is on your hands now." Hale, trapped between the cabin holding the truth and the hills holding the Comanche, made his choice. He was exposed. He saw the ledger in Abigail's hand as she pushed herself up. He saw the wavering in his own men. "This is not over," he roared, his voice cracking with rage. He fired one last, wild shot toward the ridge, a gesture of pure defiance. He vaulted onto his horse. "Back to town. We will get the real law." He and his men wheeled their horses, kicking up a cloud of dust as they fled. A disorganized, panicked retreat. Silence descended, heavier and more complete than the noise had been. Abigail got to her feet, her body shaking. "He will be back," Koa said, leaning against the wall, his face pale and slick with sweat. Maka and two other warriors rode down from the ridge. They dismounted, their movements fluid and silent. Maka was an older man, his face a map of sun and time, his eyes holding a deep, weary intelligence. He looked at Koa, then at Abigail. His gaze fell on the open ledger in her hand. "The book," he said, "it speaks the truth." Abigail nodded, her throat tight. "It says my father. It says he knew. He knew Hale stole the medicine. It says the rest. The gold is buried by the old well." Maka nodded, as if this was an old, familiar story. The well of the sickness. "We have to go," Koa said, pushing himself upright. Maka looked at his warrior, his face impassive. "You are weak. You will die in the desert." "I will die here if I stay," Koa countered. "He will be back with fire." Maka considered. He looked at Abigail. "You will go." "Me?" "You hold the book. You are the daughter of the man who broke the promise. You must be the one to mend it." He turned to one of his warriors, a young, lean man with watchful eyes. "Tavak, go to the town. Ride like the wind. Bring the healer, the dark-skinned man." "Dr. Isaiah." Abigail was confused. "Why?" Maka looked toward the unmarked graves of his people. "The sickness must have a witness. Tell him we are going to the old well." The young warrior was gone, a streak of motion vanishing over the rise. "We ride at dawn," Maka said. He looked at Koa. "You will ride, or you will be tied to the horse. It is your choice." Dawn came not as a sunrise, but as a lessening of the dark. The air was thin and cold. The small group moved out as a single, silent unit. Abigail rode her own horse, its saddlebags heavy with the ledger, the map pieces, and the small bag of gold coins. Koa rode a tough Comanche pony, his face set in grim lines, his body rigid with pain. Beside him, looking small and out of place, was Dr. Isaiah on his steady mule. The doctor had come without question, his bag strapped behind him. Tavak, the young warrior, led the way, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. They rode northwest into the high desert, a land of red rock and sparse, thorny yucca. The wind was already rising, a dry, persistent force that scoured their faces and filled their mouths with grit. There was no conversation. The only sounds were the crunch of hooves on the rocky soil and the high, thin whistle of the wind. Abigail felt exposed, a small, slow-moving target in the vast, empty landscape. She looked at Koa. He rode with a deep, ancestral knowledge, his body moving with the pony, but she could see the cost, the fine tremor in his hands, the line of pain etched around his mouth. By mid-morning, the world changed. The pale blue sky vanished, replaced by a churning, sickly wall of brown that rose from the ground to the heavens. "Dust!" Tavak called, his voice sharp. It hit them with the force of a solid object. The sun was extinguished. The world became a roaring, suffocating twilight, a chaos of stinging sand and noise. Abigail's horse squealed and reared. Blinded and terrified, she lost a stirrup, her grip on the reins slick with sweat. She felt a solid impact as Koa forced his pony against her horse's flank, boxing it in. He grabbed her bridle, his voice cutting through the howl. "Head down. Hold on." They huddled behind a low shelf of red rock, the animals trembling, their backs to the storm. Abigail pressed a cloth over her mouth, but the dust was in her teeth, her lungs, her eyes. It was an hour, or maybe a lifetime, before the wind lessened, the roar fading to a moan. The world that emerged was new, scoured clean, and coated in a fine red powder. The air was hotter, the sun a white, punishing disk. Abigail fumbled for her canteen. She rinsed the grit from her mouth and spat. She looked at the canteen, only a few sips left. She offered it to Dr. Isaiah. He shook his head, his face gray with exhaustion. "Save it, child." She held it out to Koa. His lips were cracked and dark. He just looked at her. "Drink," she insisted. He met her gaze, and a faint, dry smile touched his face. "What is the exchange for this water?" The words hung between them, an echo of their beginning. "For the way back," Abigail said, her voice thick. He took the canteen, drank one small, sparing sip, and handed it back to her. They pushed on. The map, with its strange, mismatched compass, guided Tavak. He seemed to read the land itself, the subtle shifts in rock, the bend of a dry wash. In the afternoon, he stopped, pointing. There, a great skeletal cottonwood tree stood alone, its massive trunk blackened and split down the middle, its branches stark against the sky. "Struck by lightning," Dr. Isaiah murmured. "A marker, indeed." They dismounted, their legs unsteady. 20 yards from the dead tree, they found it. It was not a well, not anymore. It was a wide, shallow hollow in the earth, choked with heavy rocks, rotting timbers, and the skeletal remains of tumbleweeds. The ground was hard and sterile. Koa limped to the edge, his leg dragging. He knelt, touching the piled stones. He filled it in. Hail. Tavak, scouting the perimeter, bent and picked something up. A shovel. The handle was cracked, the blade rusted, but the disturbance in the dirt around it was fresh. "Someone has been here," he said. "They were digging." "Hail," Abigail whispered. He was looking. He knew it was here, but he did not know where to dig. Dr. Isaiah had wandered a few paces away, his gaze fixed on the ground. He suddenly stopped, his body rigid. "Mistress McKee, Koa, stay back." His voice was strange, tight with a command they had never heard, but they were already moving toward him. The wind had done its work here. The storm had swept the dust from the shallow ground, revealing what it had tried to hide. It was not one grave, it was dozens, a field of low, uneven mounds, a place of terrible, haphazard burial. Upsetting the ground, scoured by the wind, Abigail saw a glint of color. She bent down, her hand trembling, and picked it up. It was a string of blue and red beads, tangled in the dirt, still looped around a tiny, delicate bone, a child's necklace. She made a small sound, a gasp, and dropped it, scrambling back as if the earth itself had burned her. Koa did not move. He stood and looked at the field of shallow graves. His face was not angry, not sad. It was empty. All the fire, the rage, the pain, all of it had been burned away, leaving a cold, terrifying void. He sank to his knees. He did not look at the well. He did not look at them. He just stared at the resting place of his people, his eyes as dark and deep as the night that was buried there. He said nothing. Dr. Isaiah finally spoke, his voice thick, broken. "We must leave. This is a burial ground. It is consecrated by sorrow. We have no right to disturb this place." "But the ledger," Abigail whispered, her hand on her saddlebag. "The gold," my father said. "This is a tomb, child, not a treasure chest." He shook his head, his own eyes full of tears. "Whatever promise is here, it belongs to them now. Let it be." "He is right," a new voice said. Maka was there, with 2 other warriors. They had come as silently as the shadows. They sat on their ponies, their faces grim. Maka dismounted. He walked to the edge of the graves, took a small pouch from his belt, and sprinkled a handful of yellow cornmeal onto the dirt. He spoke a few words, low and soft, not to them, but to the ground. He turned. "We do not touch the grave. We honor the dead." "But the promise," Koa said, his voice a low rasp. "The book, the names." Maka looked at him. The promise was not in the grave. "Koa," he pointed at the choked, filled-in well. "That is the grave." He looked at Abigail. "Your father's book. Read the words." Abigail pulled the ledger out, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the page. She found the last entry. He wrote, "Buried by the well." Not in it, by the well. Maka looked at the black tree, then at the filled-in well. He paced, his steps deliberate, 2 body lengths from the water. He stopped. He pointed at a patch of bare, hard-packed earth, indistinguishable from the rest. "Here, the promise is here." Tavak brought the shovel. The ground was like baked clay. He struck it, the blade ringing. Koa took it from him. He was weak, his leg barely holding him. But he dug with a desperate, focused energy, grunting with each impact. The shovel struck something that was not stone. They fell to their knees, clawing at the dirt with their hands. It was a small, tin box, rusted, heavy. They lifted it out. The lock was a lump of orange rust. Koa took his knife, jammed the tip under the lid, and pried. The metal screamed and gave way. They stared inside. There was a small, heavy canvas bag. Koa opened it. It was full of gold. Not coins, but small, rough nuggets and dust. The gold the families had paid. There were other things. A sealed tin of medicine. The label faded. A stack of folded receipts, identical to the one May had given her. And at the very bottom, a single sheet of paper. It was a list, written in her father's hand, a list of names, Comanche names. Koa took the paper. He traced his finger down the list. He stopped. His breath hitched. He pointed to a name. My uncle. He pointed to the name just below it. His son. This was not a ledger of supplies. It was a list of the dead, a list of the families who had paid for a promise and had been given a grave. A sound, not the wind, a horse. Tavak knocked an arrow, spinning, but it was too late. Tucker Hale rode out from behind a high wall of red rock. Not 20 yards away, he was alone. his face slick with sweat, his eyes glittering with a triumphant madness. "Well, well," he called, his voice booming with false cheer. "A digging party. And you did all the hard work for me." He had his rifle across his lap. A coiled lariat was in his free hand and tied to his saddle. Abigail saw with a cold dread was a large tin can. Oil. "Give me the box, girl," Hale said, "and the book, and the list." Koa stood up. He was swaying, but he stood. He placed himself between Hale and Abigail. He was holding the list. "When I came to your house," he said, his voice low, directed at Abigail, not at Hale, "I came for gold, that was all. To buy my cousins. A simple trade. Gold for life." He looked at the list in his hand. He looked at the field of graves, at the necklace of blue beads in the dust. "But this," he said, his voice thick with a new, terrible weight, "this is not gold. This is a list of ghosts." He looked at Hale, his eyes blazing with a cold, pure hatred. "No gold can wash a dirty promise. This is a debt of blood, and you will not have it." Hale laughed. A short, ugly bark. He raised his rifle. "I will have it all." Hale's rifle was steady. His eyes were not. They were wide, glittering with a desperate, triumphant sheen. He was a man who had just seen his deepest, darkest secret dug up from the earth. Behind him, the wind soughed over the field of shallow graves. A low, mournful sound. Koa stood between Hale and Abigail, swaying on his feet. The list, the names of his dead kin, was crumpled in his fist. Dr. Isaiah was frozen, his hands half raised. Tavok had an arrow knocked, but Hale was too far for a sure shot, and he held his rifle on Abigail. Maka and his warriors were still on the ridges, too far to intervene in this sudden, close confrontation. Hale laughed, a dry, ugly bark. "I will have it all." "No," Tavok shouted, and loosed his arrow. It was a distraction. The arrow flew wide, but it made Hale flinch. In that second, Koa threw the heavy, rusted tin box. He did not throw it at Hale, but at the ground. It landed with a heavy, metallic thud, and the gold dust spilled onto the rocks. Hale, his greed overcoming his caution, fired his rifle into the dirt near Koa's feet. "Stop! Stop, or she dies!" The standoff was absolute, a triangle of hate, Hale holding them there. Koa bleeding, his chest heaving, and Maka on the hills, watching. The sun, a merciless copper disk, began to touch the western horizon. The shadows of the red rocks stretched, long and cold. "We will wait," Maka's voice boomed from the ridge. "The darkness will give us counsel. You will not leave this place." Tucker Hale. Hale looked around, his bravado fading. He was one man, they were many. His men were gone. He had ridden here alone, following them, sure of his prize. Now he was trapped. The light was failing. He could not fight them all in the dark. He backed his horse away. 20 yards. He dismounted, keeping his rifle trained on the group by the well. He would guard the gold. He would guard the well. He would wait for his men, who must be searching for him. Maka, Tavok, and the other 2 warriors rode down, their ponies silent. They did not approach Hale. They approached the group. Maka looked at the darkening sky. He pointed to a deep fissure in the rock face, a wide, shallow cave formed by a rock slide ages ago. "We wait there. We wait for the sun." Dr. Isaiah helped Koa. Abigail gathered the ledger, the list, and her rifle. They left the spilled gold. They left Hale, a dark silhouette against the dying light, a solitary, hateful guard sitting by a field of bones. The rock alcove was deep, shielded from the wind. It was cold, the stone holding the memory of the night. Tavok and the others built a small, smokeless fire using dry greasewood, its sharp, resinous smell filling the small space. They sat at the mouth of the cave, watching Hale, who had built his own, larger fire near the well, a beacon of defiance. The wind howled outside the alcove, a high, lonely shriek. Abigail sat near the small fire. The tension of the day, the week, had settled into her bones, a deep, cold ache. Dr. Isaiah was asleep, his head resting on his bag, his breathing the shallow rasp of an exhausted man. Koa was leaning against the rock wall, his eyes closed. His face was pale, almost gray in the flickering light. The digging, the fight, it had taken the last of his strength. His leg, she saw, was bleeding again. The stitches she had put in had torn open. She moved toward him. She took her canteen, wet a clean rag, and knelt beside him. He did not open his eyes. "It must be cleaned," she said, her voice quiet under the sound of the wind. He nodded, a sharp, tense movement. She untied the buckskin wrap. The gash was ugly, inflamed, the skin puckered around her rough stitches. Her hands were shaking. She was not a doctor. She was just a woman who was tired, tired of dust and death and the heavy weight of her father's sins. She was tired, and she was suddenly, acutely aware of his closeness, the warmth from his body, the smell of dust and sweat and the sharp, metallic tang of his blood. She cleaned the wound, her touch as gentle as she could make it. He was rigid, his breath hissing through his teeth, but he made no other sound. She took her needle and thread from her pouch, the same needle she had used in the cellar, and began the slow, painful work of stitching his skin back together. "My sister," he said, his voice a low rasp. Abigail stopped, the needle poised. "She was in that camp. She was older than me. She was promised to a warrior. She was good at laughing." He opened his eyes. They were dark, full of a pain that had nothing to do with his leg. "When the sickness came, our shaman said it was a white man's spirit, but my uncle, he trusted your father. He had taken the gold. He said the medicine was coming, the medicine that was bought with our own gold." He paused, and a single, hard tear tracked a clean line through the dust on his cheek. "She died waiting for it. She died calling for water, and Tucker Hale, he sat on a horse, just like today, and would not let anyone pass. He called it a quarantine." Abigail's hands were steady now. The shaking was gone, replaced by a cold, shared sorrow. She finished the stitch, pulling it tight. "I used to hate your people," she whispered, not looking at him. He turned his head, his gaze sharp. "My husband, Thomas, he was killed in a card game. But the story I was told, it was always the Comanche, a raid that never happened, an argument that was twisted. It was easier. It was easier to blame people I did not know, people who lived in the shadows of my fear." She tied off the thread, her fingers brushing his skin. He did not pull away. "His death," she said, her voice barely audible. "The man he argued with. It was one of Hale's men. I think Hale wanted my land even then. He wanted the well. He wanted the rumor. My father was dead, and I was in the way." They sat in the silence, the small fire crackling between them. They were two people from different worlds, bound together by the same man's greed, the same legacy of broken promises. Koa reached to his belt. He slowly unsheathed his knife. It was a simple, heavy blade, the handle wrapped in worn leather. Abigail tensed. He did not point it at her. He held it out, handle first. His gaze was steady, searching hers. "If I frighten you," he said, his voice low, "if I ever frighten you, keep this." Abigail looked at the knife, the firelight gleaming on its sharp edge. She looked at his hand, steady and strong, offering her the one weapon he had left. She did not take it. She reached out and closed his fingers back around the handle. She smiled, a small, tired smile that barely touched her lips. "The only thing I need to keep," she said, "is your word." He stared at her, his expression softening. He sheathed the knife. He looked away from her, toward the mouth of the alcove, at the wind howling in the darkness, toward the high mountains in the west, so dark they were just a deeper black against the night sky. "Come with me," he said. The words were so quiet, she almost missed them. What? "When this is done, when the list is read and the promise is paid, do not stay in that cabin. This land is full of your father's ghosts. Tucker Hale will be gone, but the town, they will not forget. They will not forgive you for standing with me." He looked at her, his eyes intense. "Come with me, not to run, to go to the west, where the land is new, where a name is just a name." It was not a plea, it was a statement, a simple, profound invitation. She did not answer. She did not know how. He reached up, his hand fumbling at his own neck. He pulled a thin leather thong over his head. On it was a strand of polished, dark red beads. They looked like bone. They were warm from his skin. He leaned forward. Abigail did not move. He was close, so close she could feel the heat from his skin, the warmth of his breath against the cold wind that snaked into the cave. He did not kiss her. He did not touch her, except for his hands as he placed the thong around her neck. The beads settled against her collarbone, a small, solid weight, a promise, a commitment. He leaned back. He looked tired, but the emptiness was gone from his eyes. He settled himself against the rock, wincing as he moved his leg. He looked almost peaceful. "If I snore," he whispered, the corner of his mouth ticking up. "Do not shoot me." Abigail felt a small, surprising bubble of warmth in her chest, a feeling she had not had in years. "I will only shoot," she whispered back, "if you dream of stealing my gold." His smile faded, his gaze locking with hers. "The gold is worthless," he said. "The list, that is the only thing that matters." He closed his eyes. Abigail sat by the fire, her hand on the warm, red beads at her throat. Outside, the wind howled. Across the clearing, Tucker Hale's fire burned, a hateful, watchful eye in the dark, waiting for the dawn. The light came first, not as warmth, but as a gray, metallic dilution of the dark. It outlined the rocks, turning the world from black to a cold, flat steel. Inside the alcove, no one had truly slept. Abigail sat with her back against the stone, her father's ledger heavy in her lap. Her hand was at her throat, fingers wrapped around the warm, smooth beads Koa had given her. Koa was watching the mouth of the cave, his body tense. His newly stitched leg was stretched out, stiff, and he cradled his wounded side, but his eyes were clear and sharp. Dr. Isaiah was repacking his bag, his movements precise and methodical, the calmest man among them. Outside, the wind had died, leaving a silence that felt loud, brittle, and wrong. Then came the sound. Horses. Not one, but several. Not the silent, ghostly approach of the Comanche, but the confident, jingling clatter of shod horses moving over rock. "Hale," Abigail whispered, her hand tightening on her rifle. Koa shook his head. "His men, they found him?" Maka and Tavak, who had been guarding the entrance, faded back into the deepest shadows of the cave. The other two warriors were already gone, having melted into the rocks on the ridge above, becoming part of the landscape. Tucker Hale stepped out into the clearing, his large frame silhouetted against the brightening sky. He was not alone. 4 men were with him. New men, hired guns from the settlement, their faces hard and drawn in the cold light. They fanned out, their rifles ready. They looked nervous, their eyes shifting from the cave to the ridges and back. Hale had his confidence back. He was no longer a lone man trapped in the dark. He was a commander. He walked to the center of the clearing, near the spilled gold and the rusted tin box. He was energized, triumphant. He pointed at the cave. "They are in there. The Comanche who murdered that rancher, and the woman who helped him." He kicked the tin box. He bent and pulled out the stack of old, yellowed receipts, the ones signed by him and Elias McKee. He held them up. "And this is the proof," he shouted to his new men. "This is evidence. They stole this gold, a payment for a treaty they never meant to honor. They brought the sickness with them. They always bring the sickness." It was a brilliant lie, a twisting of the truth so complete it became its own terrible weapon. He was painting them as diseased murderers, and himself as the law, retrieving stolen property. "You in the cave?" he roared. "You have one chance. Send out the gold and the woman. The Comanche dies either way. You have 1 minute before we burn you out." He unstrapped the heavy oil can from his horse's saddle, the one he had brought from Abigail's cabin, and set it on the ground. The attack began. It was not a rush, it was a siege. Hale's men took cover behind the rocks, their rifles cracking, bullets whining off the stone mouth of the alcove. The air filled with the sharp smell of black powder and the scream of ricochets. Inside, the cave was a bottleneck. They were protected, but they were also trapped. Abigail took a position by one side of the entrance. She fired, not at a man, but at the rock near him, forcing him to duck. Koa, his face pale, dragged himself to the other side. He had only his knife. He watched, his body coiled, waiting for the rush that must come. Dr. Isaiah, his face grim, pulled his mule into the deepest part of the cave, shielding the animal. He sat on his bag, the ledger and the list safe beside him. He was the witness, and he would protect the truth. The fight was in 2 layers. Outside, bullets zipped from the ridges. Tavek and the other warrior were moving, firing, making themselves seem like 10 men, drawing the posse's attention, keeping them pinned. But Hale was focused on the cave. He wanted the ledger. He wanted Abigail and Koa dead. "This is not working," one of his men yelled as a bullet from the ridge plucked at his sleeve. "They are all around us." "Then burn them," Hale roared. He pulled a torch from his pack, a thick stick wrapped in an oil-soaked rag. He lit it. The firing stopped. The sudden silence was terrifying. "You cannot," Dr. Isaiah yelled from the darkness of the cave. "There is a woman in here, a white woman." "She is no woman," Hale shouted back. "She is an accomplice. She chose her side." He was about to throw the torch. Abigail knew she had only one weapon left. It was not her rifle. It was the list. She stuffed her rifle into Koa's hands. She stepped into the mouth of the cave, unarmed, her hands raised. The ledger was in one hand, the single sheet of paper with the names in the other. "Wait," her voice, high and clear, echoed in the clearing. Hale paused, the burning torch in his hand, a look of pure malice on his face. "You want evidence. Mr. Hale, you want to talk about the law. Then let us talk." She held up the yellowed receipt, the one May had given her. "This is your signature. You signed this. You signed for the medicine. You signed for the food. You signed for the rifles." Hale's men looked at him. This was not what he had told them. "It is a forgery," Hale snarled. "Then what is this?" Abigail cried, and she held up the list of names. "This is not gold," she said, her voice breaking but strong. "This is a list of the dead, the families you and my father swore to protect, the people who paid you." She started to read. "Tave, a warrior. Pavika, a mother. Asatai, a grandmother." "What is this nonsense?" one of the gunmen muttered, shifting uneasily. "So Haite," Abigail read, her eyes locked on Hale, a boy, aged 8. Hale's face was a mask of pure rage. He had lost control. He threw the torch. It flew in a high arc and landed in the pile of dry brush and old timber near the cave mouth. The flames caught instantly, a sheet of orange that roared to life, licking at the stone. "The fire!" Koa yelled. A heavy plank of old weld timber, one they had dragged in for cover, began to smoke and catch. The fire was rolling in, eating the oxygen, filling the cave with acrid smoke. Koa, his face a mask of determination, grabbed the burning plank. He did not feel the pain in his wounded leg. He braced himself in the entryway, using the heavy, smoldering wood as a shield, pushing the flames back. The fire licked at his arms, catching the sleeve of his buckskin shirt. He cried out, a low, sharp sound, but he did not drop the shield. His hand, the one he used to grip the wood, was burning. Hale was laughing. He saw them, trapped, silhouetted against the flames. He ran to his horse, grabbed the heavy oil can, and turned to throw it into the fire, to turn the alcove into an inferno. He was laughing. He did not see Abigail. She had picked up the rifle. She was a steady, calm point in the chaos. She had Koa shielding her from the flames. She had Hale standing still. And she had her target. Not the man, the can. She fired. The bullet hit the tin can with a heavy, metallic thud. It punctured the side. Oil sprayed out. And in the terrible, perfect silence that followed the shot, the oil hit the torch Hale was still holding. It did not explode. It ignited. A sheet of fire enveloped Hale, his horse, and the ground around them. The horse screamed, a terrible human sound, and reared, a pillar of flame. It bolted, blind with terror, straight toward Hale's men, a living comet of fire. Hale's men scattered, yelling in panic, trying to control their own terrified mounts. The entire clearing was in chaos. Hale himself was on the ground, rolling, beating at the flames on his clothes. He was no longer a commander. He was just a man, burned and broken. But he was not done. He scrambled to his feet, his face a raw, blackened mask. He saw Koa, still holding the smoldering plank, his hand ruined. He saw Abigail, her rifle empty. Haley pulled his heavy pistol from his belt and charged the alcove, his roar of rage inhuman. Koa dropped the plank and met the charge, his knife in his good hand. They collided. Hale was a bear, his weight and madness overriding Koa's skill. He smashed Koa's hand against the rock wall. The knife clattered to the ground. Hale jammed the pistol barrel against Koa's head. Abigail did not hesitate. She swung her rifle like a club, just as her father had taught her. The heavy wooden stock hit Hale's wrist with a sickening, wet crunch. His finger pulled the trigger. The shot went wild, the muzzle flash scorching the rock as the pistol flew from his shattered hand. He roared and turned on her. He never made it. Maka was there. He had come from the shadows, silent as the judgment of the dead. He did not use his rifle. He did not use his knife. He slammed the butt of his own rifle into Hale's throat. It was not a killing blow. It was a stopping blow. It crushed Hale's voice box, ending his words, his lies, his power, forever. Hale collapsed, clutching his throat, his breath a silent, agonized wheeze. Maka looked at him, his face impassive. Then he looked at Abigail. "The book," he commanded. "Read the book of your father." Abigail, shaking so hard she could barely stand, picked up the ledger. Koa was on the ground, cradling his burned hand, but he was watching. Dr. Isaiah had stepped forward, his face a grim mask. She stood over the writhing, silent form of Tucker Hale, and she read, October 10th, 1868. T. Hale has taken the shipment. He says the quarantine is for the public good. He lies. I am complicit. She read every word, her voice gaining strength, the truth of her father's confession washing over the smoking battlefield. Hale's men had regrouped. They sat on their nervous horses, watching. The fire was dying. Their leader was beaten. One of them, a young man with a pale face, rode forward. "The list," he said, his voice shaking. "The list of names you read." Abigail picked up the single sheet of paper. "Read it again," he said. She read the names. Tave, Pavaka, Sohaite. She read, a boy, aged 8. The young gunman took off his hat. He looked at the ground, then at Hale, his eyes filling with a terrible, slow-dawning horror. "My mother, she was Comanche," he whispered. "From that band, Sohaite. That was my brother, my half-brother. They told me he was lost to the sickness." He looked at Tucker Hale, his face white, his knuckles gripping his saddle horn. "You," he whispered, "you were not stopping the sickness. You were the sickness." He did not draw his gun. He did not shout. He just turned his horse, slowly, and rode away from the clearing. A man hollowed out by the truth. The other 3 gunmen looked at each other. This was not their fight. This was not their blood. They raised their hands high in the air and slowly backed their horses away. They turned and rode south, following the broken man. It was over. Maka looked at Hale, who was trying to crawl away. He pointed to the lariat still coiled on Hale's saddle, which had fallen from the burning horse. Tavak cut it free. They bound Tucker Hale, hand and foot, with his own rope. They gagged his silent mouth. Dr. Isaiah stepped forward. He carefully took the ledger, the list, and the signed receipts. He wrapped them in a piece of oilcloth from his bag, making a neat, legal parcel. "I will see this gets to the marshal in Santa Fe," he said, his voice heavy. "This is a confession. It will be heard." The sun was up. The air was cold and clean. Abigail knelt beside Koa, who was staring at his burned hand, his face gray with shock and pain. She tore a strip from her petticoat and began to wrap the wound, her hands gentle. He looked up at her, past the pain, and a grim, faint smile touched his lips. "I came here," he rasped, "to steal your father's gold." He looked over at the bound, silent, and defeated Tucker Hale. "It seems," he said, "you stole his mouth much faster." The smoke from the fire, the oil, and the black powder hung in the cold morning air, a bitter, chemical smell that choked the clean scent of the high desert. Tucker Hale lay on the ground, bound with his own rope, his breath a silent, bubbling wheeze. His burned face was a ruin, his eyes wide and rolling, fixed on nothing. Koa was leaning against the rock, his face gray, cradling his badly burned hand. Dr. Isaiah was carefully, gently, wrapping it with clean bandages from his bag, his expression grim. Abigail stood apart, her father's ledger in her hand, the list of names still clutched in her fist. The red beads Koa had given her felt heavy and hot against her skin. Maka and his warriors stood over Hale, their faces impassive. This was a white man's problem now. The sound of horses made them all turn. The 3 remaining gunmen, the ones who had fled, were riding back, slowly, their hands in the air. The young man, Silas, the one whose brother was on the list, was at their head. His face was pale, hollowed out by grief. He stopped his horse 10 yards away. "We heard," he said, his voice hoarse. "We heard the reading. We were paid. We did not know." He dismounted, his movements stiff, and walked toward the bound figure on the ground. He looked at Hale with a cold, dead expression. "He is not our boss. He is our shame." He looked at Dr. Isaiah. "What happens now?" "I am taking this evidence to the marshal in Santa Fe," the doctor said, holding up the oilcloth parcel. Silas nodded. "He will need a prisoner. We will take him." He and the other 2 men, their faces grim, lifted Hale's limp body and tied him, slumped and silent, into his own saddle. The ride back to the settlement was a slow, quiet funeral procession. Silas and his men rode in front, leading Hale's horse. Abigail and Dr. Isaiah rode next. Koa, weak from blood loss and pain, was supported on his pony by Tavak. Maka and his warriors rode behind, a silent, watchful rear guard, their duty not yet over. When they reached the town, the main street was empty. People watched from behind curtains, from the dark alleys between buildings. They saw Tucker Hale, the man who had been their law, their security, now a bound, burned, and muted prisoner. They saw his own men, their faces like stone, acting as his jailers. They saw Dr. Isaiah, his face set in grim determination, carrying a parcel like a holy relic. And they saw Abigail McKee riding beside him, her head high, the red beads bright against her dusty dress. And behind them, the Comanche. They did not ride in like a war party. They rode in like men who had come to see a long, overdue bill paid in full. Silas did not stop at the saloon. He rode to the small building that served as a holding cell. unlocked it, and he and his men pushed Hale inside. A sack of broken malice. They locked the door. "We will wait for the marshal," Silas said to Dr. Isaiah. "We will be your witnesses." He then turned and walked, not to the saloon, but to the livery. The other men followed. Their time as hired guns was over. Dr. Isaiah looked at Abigail. "Go to Mays. Get him inside." He nodded at Koa, who was barely conscious. "I will be there soon." Abigail slid from her horse and helped Koa dismount. He leaned on her, a heavy, solid weight, and for a moment she was not sure she could hold him. Tava came to his other side, and together they half carried, half dragged him across the street. May was standing in the doorway of her saloon. She had been watching. Her face was pale. She held the door open. "In here," she said. She pointed to her small back room, the one where she kept her own cot. "Lay him down." They got him onto the cot. May returned with a glass of brandy. "For the pain," she said. Koa drank it, his throat working. He looked at Abigail. His eyes clouded. "It is done," he whispered. "Not yet," she said. "Rest." Mecca and his warriors were outside, standing by their ponies. They did not enter. They were waiting. May looked at them, then at Abigail. She nodded, as if making a decision. She walked out onto the porch. She looked at Mecca. "Your men," she said, her voice clear in the quiet street. "They look hungry." Mecca looked at her, his face unreadable. "My kitchen is open," May said. "I am cooking beef stew. I expect you will all come inside and eat. On the house." It was a declaration, a shifting of the lines. Maka held her gaze for a long second, then gave a single, slow nod, one by one. The warriors dismounted and, leaving their rifles with their ponies, walked up the steps and into the saloon. The town, watching from its windows, saw the saloon, the center of white life in the settlement, had just opened its doors to the Comanche, not as enemies, but as guests. Dr. Isaiah arrived and pushed Abigail gently out of the small room. "I will tend to him. His hand is badly burned. You, go sit." Abigail walked into the main room of the saloon. It was quiet. The Comanche warriors sat at 2 tables, their movements careful, their dignity filling the space. May was behind the bar, ladling stew into bowls. A few townspeople, their curiosity overcoming their fear, drifted in. Mrs. Gable, the woman who had snubbed Abigail, was one of them. She looked at the warriors, her face tight. She looked at Abigail, who was sitting alone at a small table, her rifle on the floor, her hands wrapped around a cup of water. Mrs. Gable walked over. Her hands were twisting in her apron. "Mistress McKay, Abigail, I heard Silas. He was talking. He said you read from a book." Abigail nodded, her body numb with exhaustion. "He said there was a list of names." "Yes. My cousin," she said, her voice dropping. "He was a freighter. He used to trade with the tribes. He vanished 10 years back. They said he was robbed by the Comanche, but it was the same time. The sickness, his name, was it?" Dr. Isaiah came out of the back room. He had the oilcloth parcel. He heard the question. He unwrapped it, his face weary. He took out the single sheet of paper. "What was his name?" "Ma'am," he asked. Henry Gable." The doctor scanned the list. His finger stopped. He nodded, his face full of pity. "He is here." Mrs. Gable made a small, strangled sound. She sat down hard in the chair opposite Abigail. "He was not robbed," she whispered. He was part of it. He was one of them." "We have been blaming the wrong ghosts," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "All this time, we have been so afraid. And the real trouble was sitting right here, drinking with us." She looked at Mecca, who was eating his stew with a slow, deliberate grace. She looked at Abigail. "I am sorry," she whispered, "for my words, for, everything." Abigail just nodded. She had no words left. The next day, they returned to the well. It was a different kind of journey, not a desperate search, but a solemn duty. Abigail, Koa, his hand and arm heavily bandaged, Dr. Isaiah, Maka, and Tavak. They rode in the clean morning light. They reached the clearing. The burned patch of ground where Hale's horse had been was a black, ugly scar. The spilled gold dust was still there, glittering in the dirt. They did not touch it, not yet. First, the grave. For hours, they worked. They did not speak. They gathered the flat, red stones from the surrounding area. Koa, his left hand useless, used his right to lift and carry. Tavak and Maka, their warriors' strength turned to labor, built a low, solid wall around the entire perimeter of the shallow graves. It was not a fence to keep people out. It was a line of respect, to hold the memory in. Abigail walked the perimeter, looking for the small, blue beads she had dropped. She found them, tangled in the roots of a dead bush. She picked them up, the tiny circlet of bone and color, and placed them on the largest, flattest stone in the center. A small offering. When the wall was finished, Maka stood at the head of the grave field. He spoke, his voice low, in his own language, a song of remembrance and release. He then took his own canteen and poured the water onto the hard, dry ground, a final drink for the dead. Dr. Isaiah stepped forward, his hat in his hand. He looked at the low wall of stones, at the single string of blue beads. He looked at Abigail, at Koa. "Justice," he said, his deep voice quiet but firm, "is water for those who have thirsted." They stood in silence for a long time, the wind whispering over the stones. Then they turned to the matter of the gold. Maka knelt by the spilled dust and the small, heavy bag from the tin box. He looked at Abigail. "Your father's ledger." She opened it. She read the first name, Tave. Maka took a small leather pouch from his belt and scooped a measure of gold dust into it. He tied it shut. "Read," he said. "Pavika," she read. He filled another pouch. "Esatai, Sohaite." One by one. She read the names from her father's list, one by one. Maka measured out the gold. It was not a division of wealth. It was a ritual. It was the closing of a book, the paying of a debt, a name for a name, a measure of gold for a measure of grief. When they were done, the ground was clean. A dozen small, heavy pouches lay in a row. "No one is rich," Koa said, his voice rough. "No," Maka said. He picked up the pouches. "But the promise is closed. The book is balanced." He handed half the pouches to Koa, for the families that remain. They left the clearing. They sealed the grave. They left the rusted shovel and the burned patch of ground as the only remaining scars. Abigail returned to her cabin. It felt alien, the silence of it wrong. The trapdoor to the cellar was open, a dark, accusing square on the floor. She walked to her father's chest. She lifted the lid. It was empty. The Bible, the ledger, the list. They were all with Dr. Isaiah, on their way to Santa Fe. The false bottom was open. The secrets were gone. It was just a box. She sat on her cot, the same cot where she'd hidden her rifle, where she had laid her head in fear for so long. She looked at the log walls, the small window, the stone hearth. This was her home, her father's home. She could stay. The town was shaken. Mrs. Gable had apologized. Silas and his men had upheld a new kind of law. Perhaps things could change. But she knew they could not. Not for her. She would always be Abigail McKee, the woman who had hidden a Comanche, the woman whose father's sins were now public knowledge. She would live under their looks. The pity, the suspicion, the whispered thanks. It would be a prison, just of a different kind. She thought of Koa's words. "Come with me, not to run, to go toward—" She made her decision. She went to the saloon for the last time. May was there, wiping the bar. The saloon was empty, clean, and quiet. "You are leaving," May said. It was not a question. Abigail nodded. "I cannot stay. I do not belong here anymore." May stopped wiping. She set the glass down. She looked at Abigail, her eyes sharp but kind. "Child, you belong wherever you set your 2 feet, but this place," she gestured to the town outside, "it is full of ghosts you did not make. You spent your life honoring your father's memory. You did your duty. You did more. You gave him justice, which is more than he ever gave himself." She leaned forward, her voice low. Go west. Go with that young man. Do not look back because of what they whisper. You have earned your peace. You look back only when your heart, your own heart, tells you it is time." Abigail nodded, her throat thick. She put her hand on the red beads at her throat. She walked back to her cabin. The dust had settled from the morning's ride. The wind was low. She heard the sound of insects in the dry grass, a sound that had been drowned out by gunfire and fear. The world was patient. She went to her well, the shallow, gritty well. She cranked the pulley, its familiar squeal a comfort. She drew up a bucket of water. It was low and silty, but it was just water now. Not her faith, not her secret, not her only anchor. Just water. She drank, and it was cool. She stood by the well for a long time, the cool, silty water still on her lips. The cabin, her father's cabin, stood behind her, its door open, its secrets gone. It was just wood and dust, a shell. She had spent her whole life inside it, first as a daughter, then as a wife, then as a widow. She had been defined by its walls, by the rumors that clung to it like cobwebs, and by the shallow, failing well beside it. Now, it was just a building. The chest inside was an empty box. The floorboards were just wood, no longer hiding a man or a truth. She had defended it, lied for it, nearly died for it, and in doing so, she had finally set herself free from it. She walked inside for the last time. She gathered the few things that were hers: a small packet of her mother's letters, a bar of soap, her sewing kit. She put them in her saddlebags, which already held her father's rifle. She looked at the cold iron stove, the narrow cot. They were not hers. They belonged to a life that was over. She walked out and pulled the heavy door closed. It scraped on the threshold. She took the iron key, the key to the main door, from her pocket. She looked at it. She could have thrown it, buried it. Instead, she walked to the porch post and hung the key on the old, rusted nail that her father had once used for hanging harnesses. She did not leave a note. The key was the note. Let whoever comes next enter. Let them find the empty chest and the clean, silent room. Let them bring their own truth, because the old, buried ones were finally gone. She saddled her horse. The animal was steady, glad to be leaving the small, tense patch of land. She strapped her meager belongings behind the cantle. They were waiting for her on the low rise, where the watchers had been. Koa was on his pony, his right arm in a heavy sling, the bandages stark white against his skin, his left hand holding the reins. Maka sat beside him, his face turned toward the west. Tavak and the other warriors were with them, their ponies restless. She mounted her horse, the movement feeling different. Not a chore, but a choice. She rode up the slope, away from the cabin, away from the well. She did not look back. She stopped her horse beside Koa. The morning was clear, the air washed clean by the night's wind. The high desert stretched out before them, a vast, empty promise of red rock and blue sky. He looked at her. The pain was etched deep in his face, from his side, his leg, his ruined hand. But his eyes were clear. He looked at her, at the rifle in her saddle scabbard, at the new, straight line of her back. He nodded, a small, formal gesture. "Come with me," he said. The words were the same as the night before, in the dark, smoky cave. But here, in the bright, unforgiving sunlight, they meant something more. "It is not a leaving," he said, his voice low. For her alone. It is a going toward... Abigail looked at the endless land before them, a land that held no memory of her father, no shadow of Tucker Hale. She thought of the cabin, the town, the whispers, the fear. They were behind her. She reached up and touched the red beads at her throat. She turned to him and smiled. A real smile, not the dry, brittle thing she had worn for years, but a slow, unfolding warmth that reached her eyes. I already started, she said. I started going the moment I gave you that drink of water. Koa held her gaze, and she saw the respect in his eyes, the understanding. He did not smile, but the hardness around his own eyes softened. He turned his horse west. Maka raised his hand. The small group moved out, not as a war party, not as fugitives, but as a caravan of survivors. They did not ride fast. There was no one chasing them. Their pace was the steady, ground-covering walk of people who have a long way to go. And all the time they need to get there. They were not running from anything. They were just going. They rode toward the western valley, a place Maka knew, a place where the mountains rose up to catch the clouds, where the rivers ran clear, a place, he had said, where the law from Santa Fe had not yet stretched its fingers, a place where a man's word was still his bond, and where justice was not found in a book or a courtroom, but in the daily actions of people. Their journey was slow, measured by Koa's healing. They stopped often. Dr. Isaiah had given Abigail salves and bandages, and she tended to his wounds. His hand was a ruin of burned flesh, and the doctor had said he would never hold a bow with it again, but his left hand was strong. As they traveled, the world changed. The dry red rock gave way to juniper and pine. They found water in small, clear springs. The air was cooler. Abigail learned. She had lived in the desert her whole life, but she had never truly seen it. Tavak taught her how to read the tracks of a rabbit, how to find water by the flight of a bird. She learned to ride not as a passenger, but as a partner with her horse, her body moving with the animal, no longer afraid of its power. She learned to hunt, her father's rifle steady in her hands, her aim true. She learned to skin a deer, to mend hides with an awl and sinew. Her sewing skills turned to a new, practical purpose. And Koa learned. He sat by the fire at night, his good hand painfully, slowly, tracing the shapes of the letters in her father's ledger. Abigail had kept it, not as a confession, but as a record, a debt book. She taught him the sounds, she taught him the words, and he began to read the names himself. Tave, Pavika, Sohaite. He read the list of the dead, his own uncle, his cousin, and as he read each name, he would take a piece of charcoal from the fire and draw a single black line through it. Not to erase it, but to mark it as paid. He was laying his own ghosts to rest, one name at a time. Their love was not a thing of grand pronouncements. It was not a fire, like the one that had destroyed Hale. It was a thing of quiet, daily acts. It was the way he would wake and find she had already tended the fire, his blanket adjusted. It was the way she would look up from her mending and find him watching her, his gaze steady and full of a quiet respect that was more profound than any whispered word of adoration. It was a love built not on riches, but on courage. It was an earned peace. They had met over a drink of water, a simple act of compassion that had unraveled a decade of lies. They had found in each other a shared understanding that justice was not a single, violent act, not one gunshot in the dust. It was a daily, patient, repeating action. It was mending what was broken. It was paying what was owed. It was telling the truth. One evening, they reached the crest of the final ridge. The valley spread out below them. A wide, green basin. A river shining like a silver ribbon in the distance. Mecca pointed. This is the place. They sat on their horses, looking at their new home. The sun was setting, the sky a breathtaking wash of orange and deep, velvet purple. The light, low and golden, caught the red beads at Abigail's throat, making them glow as if they held their own fire. She reached up, Her hand, no longer chapped and trembling, but strong, brown, and capable, closing over them. She looked at Koa. He was watching her, not the valley. She smiled, a slow, quiet smile of pure contentment, and said nothing. She had blown away the dust. She had kept the promise. She was, finally, free. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to connect with you, so please comment with where you are listening from, and subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Like the video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.